Deep in the Amazon rainforest, where thick green trees block out most of the sunlight, Dr. Lisa Rodriguez was having the best day of her career. She had been digging in this remote spot for 3 months, looking for signs of ancient people who might have lived here thousands of years ago. Most days, she and her team found nothing but dirt, rocks, and the occasional piece of broken pottery. But today was different. Very different. "Hey, come look at this," Lisa called to her teammate Jake, who was working about 20 feet away. Jake put down his small digging tools and walked over, wiping sweat from his face. The jungle was always hot and sticky, making their work even harder. Lisa was kneeling next to what looked like a stone wall buried deep in the ground. But this wasn't just any stone wall. Strange symbols were carved into it, symbols that didn't match anything they had seen before in their studies of ancient South American cultures. "These markings are incredible," Jake said, running his fingers along the carved symbols. "They look really old, but the style is completely unknown to me." The team spent the next week carefully removing dirt and plants from around the stone structure. What they found made no sense according to everything they knew about history. The stones were perfectly cut and fitted together without any cement or mortar, showing a level of skill that seemed impossible for the time period they thought it came from. As they dug deeper, they realized they had found the entrance to some kind of underground room or chamber. The doorway was massive, much bigger than any normal person would need. It stood nearly 15 feet tall and 8 feet wide. Lisa and her team exchanged confused looks. Why would ancient people build such huge doorways? Maybe it was for ceremonies, suggested Maria, another team member. Some cultures built oversized entrances to make their temples feel more impressive. But as they carefully entered the chamber with their flashlights, they discovered something that changed everything they thought they knew about the past. The walls were covered with paintings that looked as fresh as if they had been made yesterday, even though the chamber had clearly been sealed for a very long time. These weren't simple cave paintings either. They showed detailed scenes of daily life, but the people in these paintings were not ordinary-sized. The paintings showed 2 different types of people living together. Some looked normal, about the same height as Lisa and her team, but others were much, much taller. The tall people in the paintings stood at least twice the height of the normal ones, maybe even more. And the strange thing was, the normal-sized people in the paintings seemed to be following the tall ones, like the tall people were in charge. "This doesn't make sense," Lisa whispered, as she studied the paintings with her flashlight. "These tall people, they're not mythical creatures or gods. They're painted like real people wearing regular clothes, doing everyday activities." In one painting, a very tall woman was teaching a group of normal-sized people how to grow crops. In another, tall people were showing the shorter ones how to build structures. Throughout all the paintings, it was clear that the tall people were the leaders and teachers, while the normal-sized ones were the students and followers. Jake was examining the other side of the chamber when he made another discovery. "Lisa, you need to see this," he said, his voice shaking slightly. In the center of the chamber stood what looked like a large crystal structure, almost like a bed made of some kind of clear, glowing material. And lying on this crystal bed was a person, a very tall person. The figure appeared to be sleeping, but something was wrong with this picture. The person looked perfect, almost too perfect. Their skin had no wrinkles or marks of age. Their long hair was perfectly arranged, and most shocking of all, they appeared to be breathing very, very slowly. Lisa approached carefully, her heart beating fast. As a scientist, she tried to think of logical explanations. Maybe this was some kind of preserved body like a mummy. But mummies didn't look this fresh, and they certainly didn't appear to be breathing. The person on the crystal bed was a woman, and she was huge. Even lying down, Lisa could tell she would be at least 12 feet tall when standing. She was wearing clothes made of materials that looked more advanced than anything the team had seen from ancient cultures. "We need to be very careful here," Lisa told her team. "We don't understand what we're looking at." But Maria, who was always curious about how things worked, had been examining the crystal bed structure. She noticed there were symbols carved around its base, similar to the ones they had found on the chamber walls. "I think this might be some kind of technology," Maria said. "Look at these symbols. They seemed to be in a pattern, almost like instructions. Before, Lisa could stop her. Maria had traced her finger along one of the symbol patterns. The moment she completed the pattern, the crystal bed began to glow brighter. The chamber filled with a low humming sound, and the walls themselves began to emit a soft light. "Maria, step back," Lisa shouted, but it was too late. The woman on the crystal bed took a deep, full breath. Her eyes opened slowly, and she began to sit up. As she rose to a sitting position, the team realized just how massive she really was. Even sitting, she was taller than any of them standing. The woman looked around the chamber, taking in her surroundings. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, and when she looked at the 4 team members, there was no confusion or fear in her expression. Instead, she seemed to be studying them, like a teacher looking at new students. She spoke, but in a language none of them recognized. However, something amazing happened. As she continued speaking, her words began to change, shifting from the unknown language to something that sounded more and more like English. "Small ones," she said, her voice deep and clear. "How long have I been sleeping?" Lisa found her voice. "First, we don't know. We're archaeologists. We found this chamber and accidentally woke you up. Who are you?" The woman stood up, and the team had to step back and crane their necks to look up at her. She was indeed 12 feet tall. Maybe more, but she moved gracefully without any awkwardness despite her size. "I am Zara," she said, looking down at them with what seemed like mild amusement. "And you, small ones, have much to learn about the true history of this world." As Zara looked around the chamber, examining the paintings on the walls, Lisa realized that everything they thought they knew about human history was about to change. The paintings weren't showing myths or legends, they were showing memories. Real memories of a time when giants walked the earth and were in charge. And now one of those giants was awake again. Zara turned back to the team, and something in her posture and the way she looked at them made it clear that despite being outnumbered 4-1, despite being in a world that had changed completely since she went to sleep, she was not afraid or uncertain. She was taking charge. "Tell me, small ones," Zara said, her voice carrying natural authority that made them all want to listen carefully. "What year is this? And what has happened to my people?" Lisa looked up at this 12-foot-tall woman and realized that their archaeological expedition had just become something much bigger and more important than finding old pottery pieces. They had just awakened, someone who remembered when the world was very different, when people like her were the ones making the decisions. And judging by the confident way Zara was looking at them, she was planning to make decisions again. Over the next few days, Zara's presence completely changed everything about the research camp. Lisa and her team had set up their base camp about half a mile from the ancient chamber, but now they found themselves making daily trips back and forth as Zara explored her new reality. The first morning after her awakening, Zara emerged from the chamber and looked around at the jungle with eyes that seemed to see things differently than the rest of them. She touched trees, smelled flowers, and listened to bird calls with the focus of someone trying to understand how much the world had changed while she slept. "The forest is different," she told Lisa as they walked back toward the camp. "Smaller, trees, different sounds. Some of the plants I remember are gone." She paused and picked up a piece of modern camping equipment that Jake had dropped. "And you small ones have created many new things." Lisa found herself walking slightly behind Zara, even though she was supposed to be leading the way to their camp. There was something about Zara's presence that made you want to follow rather than lead. Maybe it was her height, or maybe it was the confident way she moved through the jungle like she owned it. When they reached the camp, Zara's arrival created an immediate stir. The team had 4 small tents arranged around a central cooking area, with various pieces of scientific equipment scattered around on folding tables. Everything looked tiny compared to Zara. She examined their solar panels with great interest, running her large hands over the surface carefully. "Clever," she said. "You capture sun energy, but in such a complicated way." She picked up Lisa's laptop computer, holding it in one hand like it was a small book. "And you store knowledge in these little boxes." Jake watched nervously as Zara handled his expensive equipment. "Please be careful with that. It took us months to get funding for this expedition." Zara looked at him with what might have been amusement. Do not worry, small one. I understand precious things. She set the laptop down gently, then did something that amazed them all. She began rearranging their entire campsite. Without asking permission, Zara started moving their equipment to better locations. She relocated their cooking area to a spot that got better airflow. She repositioned their tents so they were better protected from the afternoon rain that came every day. She even improved their water collection system by showing them how to arrange their tarps more efficiently. How did you know to do that? Maria asked as she watched their water containers fill up much faster than before. My people were engineers and builders long before your civilization began, Zara explained. We learned to work with nature, not against it. What struck Lisa most was how naturally her team began accepting Zara's changes. No one argued with her suggestions. No one questioned her decisions. When Zara said something should be moved, they moved it. When she suggested a better way to do something, they tried it her way, and her way was always better. By the third day, Zara had essentially taken over managing their daily operations. She woke up before everyone else and had their breakfast prepared by the time they got up. She organized their work schedules more efficiently than Lisa had managed in 3 months. She even fixed their radio, which had been giving them static for weeks. I don't understand, Jake whispered to Lisa when Zara was out of earshot. Why are we letting her run everything? This is our expedition. Lisa had been asking herself the same question. As the lead researcher, she should have been maintaining control of the situation. But every time she thought about asserting her authority, she looked up at Zara's 12-foot frame and found herself simply asking what Zara thought they should do instead. I think, Lisa said slowly, we're seeing something that's been written about in psychology books but never actually observed. When someone is physically imposing and demonstrates superior knowledge, our brains automatically start treating them as the leader, even if we don't consciously decide to. The really unsettling part was that none of them minded. Zara wasn't mean or demanding. She didn't give orders or make threats. She simply made suggestions in her calm, authoritative voice, and everyone found themselves wanting to follow those suggestions. On the 4th day, Zara made an announcement that changed everything again. I must return to the chamber, she told them over breakfast. There are others who need to wake up. Others? Lisa asked, though part of her already knew the answer. My people did not face the great catastrophe alone, Zara explained. We went into the long sleep together, waiting for the world to heal itself. Now that I am awake and see that your civilization has survived and grown, it is time to wake some of the others. The team followed Zara back to the ancient chamber, their minds racing with questions. How many others were there? Were they all as tall as Zara? What would happen when more of them woke up? Inside the chamber, Zara led them to areas they hadn't fully explored yet. Behind the main room, there were 3 smaller chambers, each containing crystal beds similar to the one Zara had been sleeping on. And on each bed, another tall figure lay in suspended animation. I will wake them slowly, Zara said. One every few days, so they can adjust to this new world gradually. She approached the first bed and began tracing symbols around its base, just as Maria had accidentally done with hers. The crystal began to glow and soon another giant figure was stirring to life. This one was a man, even taller than Zara, with broad shoulders and hands that could probably wrap around a normal person's entire torso. When he sat up and looked at Lisa's team, his expression was the same as Zara's had been, not surprised or confused, but simply assessing the situation with intelligent eyes. Zara spoke to him in their ancient language, clearly explaining what had happened and how much time had passed. The man nodded thoughtfully, then looked at the human team with what seemed like polite interest. This is Kale, Zara told them. He was our chief builder and engineer. Kale, these small ones found us and accidentally triggered my awakening. They are archaeologists, seekers of knowledge about the past. Kale stood up and Lisa had to fight the urge to step backward. If Zara was impressive at 12 feet tall, Kale was overwhelming at what must have been 13 or 14 feet. But like Zara, he moved with surprising grace and showed no aggression toward them. Greetings, small seekers, Kale said in accented but clear English. Like Zara, he seemed to be learning their language even as he spoke. You have done us a great service. Over the next few hours, Lisa watched as Kale and Zara discussed their situation in their own language, occasionally switching to English to include the human team in their conversation. What became clear was that they were making plans. Plans for waking the others, plans for exploring this modern world, and plans for figuring out their place in it. But what struck Lisa most was how naturally she and her team had started deferring to these two giants. When Kale suggested they should set up a better shelter near the chamber, everyone immediately started thinking about how to make that happen. When Zara mentioned they would need more supplies, everyone began planning supply runs to the nearest town. Nobody questioned whether these were good ideas. Nobody asked if the giants had the right to make these decisions. The tall people spoke with such natural authority that opposing them felt as silly as arguing with a teacher or a parent. By evening, as Lisa sat in their improved campsite watching, Zara and Kale worked together to solve some problem with their equipment. She realized something that both excited and worried her as a scientist. They weren't just observing the awakening of an ancient civilization. They were witnessing the return of what appeared to be the natural leaders of the human race. And judging by how easily she and her team had accepted that leadership, humanity might be ready to follow them again. 2 weeks after Kale's awakening, Lisa's quiet research expedition had turned into something she never could have imagined. Despite their best efforts to keep the discovery secret, word had gotten out. It started when they needed more supplies and had to make multiple trips to the nearest town. People started asking questions about why a small archaeology team suddenly needed industrial-sized tents and massive amounts of food. Then there was the incident with the supply helicopter. When the pilot arrived at their coordinates and saw Zara and Kale standing near the landing area, he nearly crashed trying to get a better look at what he thought might be people on stilts. After he landed and realized these were real living giants, keeping the secret became impossible. Within days, their remote jungle location was no longer remote. Government officials, military personnel, journalists, and scientists from around the world began arriving. But what none of these important visitors expected was how quickly the dynamics of every meeting changed once they actually met Zara and her people. Lisa watched it happen over and over again. A helicopter would land, and out would step some high-ranking official or famous scientist, confident and ready to take charge of the situation. They would stride forward with authority, ready to ask their questions and make their demands. Then they would see Zara approaching, all 12 feet of her, moving with that natural grace and confidence that made everyone else seem small and uncertain. The visitor would stop mid-stride, crane their neck up to make eye contact, and suddenly their whole attitude would change. "Welcome to our home," Zara would say in her calm, authoritative voice, and somehow the visitor would find themselves saying, "Thank you," instead of making demands about who was in charge. By the third week, there were over 50 people at the site. But Lisa noticed something fascinating happening. Despite all these powerful people arriving with their own agendas, the camp was running more smoothly than ever. And that was because, without anyone officially deciding it, Zara had become the person everyone looked to for decisions. When the Brazilian government officials arrived and wanted to know who had the authority to speak for the giants, everyone automatically looked to Zara. When the American scientists set up their research equipment and needed to know where they could work, they asked Zara for permission. When the news crews wanted to film interviews, they requested time with Zara first. Even General Rodriguez, a tough military man who had arrived with a team of soldiers, found himself deferring to Zara's judgment about where his people could set up their security perimeter. "It's the strangest thing," Lisa overheard him telling his aide. "I came here ready to take control of a potentially dangerous situation, and instead I'm asking a 12-foot-tall woman for permission to do my job, and somehow that feels completely natural." By now, Zara had awakened 2 more of her people. There was Dr. Nova, a woman who seemed to understand medicine and biology better than any human Lisa had ever met. When one of the soldiers cut his hand badly on some equipment, Nova examined the wound and created a healing paste from jungle plants that had the cut completely healed in 2 days. Then there was Atlas, whose specialty seemed to be understanding how things worked. He looked at their generators, their computers, their satellite communication equipment, and within hours he had improved all of them. The generators ran more efficiently, the computers processed data faster, and their internet connection became stronger than what most people had in major cities. "How do you know how to fix our technology?" Jake asked Atlas one day as he watched the giant carefully adjust their radio equipment. Atlas smiled down at him. "All technology follows the same basic principles, small friend. Your people have become very clever at making complicated solutions to simple problems. We learned long ago to find the simple solutions instead." What amazed Lisa most was how these improvements weren't just technical. The whole social dynamic of the camp had improved too. There were no arguments about work schedules, because Zara organized everyone's time efficiently. There were no disputes about resources, because the giants had shown them how to use everything more effectively. There were no power struggles between the different groups of visitors, because everyone naturally accepted that the giants were the ones making the important decisions. Dr. Peterson, a famous anthropologist from Harvard, pulled Lisa aside one afternoon. "This is the most remarkable thing I've ever witnessed," he said. "We're seeing real-time social evolution. Humans automatically organizing themselves into a hierarchy with these giants at the top, and everyone seems happier and more productive because of it." "But doesn't that worry you?" Lisa asked. "We're essentially giving up human self-determination." Dr. Peterson thought about that for a moment. "Are we? Or are we finally admitting that some people are naturally better leaders than others? These giants aren't forcing us to follow them. We're choosing to because they consistently make better decisions than we do." Lisa had to admit he had a point. In the 3 weeks since more officials and scientists had arrived, there hadn't been a single major conflict or serious problem. Compare that to most international scientific expeditions, which were usually full of ego clashes and territorial disputes. The giants had also started sharing some of their knowledge, but they were clearly being selective about it. Nova had taught the human doctors new techniques for treating infections and healing wounds, but she hadn't revealed everything she knew. Atlas had improved their technology, but he hadn't explained the principles behind his improvements. "Why don't you teach us everything?" Lisa asked Zara one evening as they sat around the central fire pit that had become the camp's gathering place. Zara looked down at her with something that might have been gentle amusement. "Would you give advanced tools to children before they were ready to use them safely?" she asked. "Are you saying we're like children to you?" "Not children," Zara said carefully, "but perhaps like younger siblings who still have much to learn. Your people have accomplished impressive things, but you have also created problems that threaten your entire world. We will share our knowledge as you prove you can handle it responsibly." That conversation made Lisa realize something important. The giants weren't just physically superior to humans, they were also thinking on a much longer timeline. Where humans made decisions based on immediate needs or short-term goals, the giants seemed to be planning for centuries ahead. This became clear when government officials started asking about the giants' plans. Did they want citizenship? Did they want land? Did they want official recognition? "We do not want these things," Zara told a group of officials from several countries. "We will take what we need to rebuild our civilization alongside yours. We will share what we choose to share. We will help solve problems that affect all life on this planet. These are not requests. These are statements of what will happen." The officials looked uncomfortable with this response, but none of them challenged it directly. How do you argue with someone who towers over you and has already proven that they can improve everything they touch? Lisa found herself in a unique position during these interactions. Because she had been the first to meet Zara, she had become the unofficial human representative in discussions between the species. But more and more she felt like she was serving as a translator rather than a negotiator. The giants would decide what they wanted to do, and Lisa would help explain it to the human authorities. She wasn't advocating for human interests against giant interests because increasingly, it seemed like those were the same thing. When Zara announced that more of her people would be awakening at sites around the world, the human officials wanted to know how many and where. When she replied that there were awakening sites on every continent with dozens of her people at each site, the room went very quiet. "How many of your people are there total?" asked Dr. Martinez, the representative from the United Nations. "Enough," Zara replied simply. Later that night, Lisa sat outside her tent looking up at the stars and thinking about what was happening. 3 weeks ago, she had been a simple archaeologist looking for pottery shards. Now she was witnessing what might be the biggest change in human civilization since the invention of agriculture. And the strange thing was, it didn't feel like a conquest or an invasion. It felt like older siblings coming home and finding that their younger siblings had made a mess of the house while they were away. Now the older siblings were calmly cleaning things up and making sure the younger ones didn't break anything else. Tomorrow, Zara had announced, she would wake up the last of her people at this site. That would bring their group to 8 giants total. Lisa couldn't help but wonder what would happen when all the awakening sites around the world were active. But as she looked over at the peaceful camp, where humans and giants were working together, more harmoniously than most all-human groups ever managed, she found herself thinking that maybe this change was exactly what the world needed. 6 months had passed since that first day in the ancient chamber, and Lisa barely recognized the world anymore. What started as a small archaeological discovery in the Amazon had grown into something that was reshaping human civilization on a global scale. She was no longer camping in a tiny tent in the jungle. Instead, she lived in a remarkable new settlement that had grown up around the original discovery site. The giants had designed and built structures that were both beautiful and practical, using techniques that human engineers were still trying to understand. The buildings were tall enough for the giants to move around comfortably, but they also had human-sized spaces and walkways built into them. Lisa's role had evolved too. She was now officially designated as the primary human liaison, a position that didn't exist 6 months ago but had become one of the most important jobs in the world. Every day she received calls from world leaders, scientists, and journalists who wanted to understand what was happening with the giants and how it would affect their countries. But the real changes were happening everywhere else on the planet. News reports that came in daily told an incredible story. In Egypt, giants had awakened near the ancient pyramids and immediately began solving the country's water shortage problems. They had designed new irrigation systems that were already turning desert areas into farmland. In Norway, awakened giants were working with human scientists to develop clean energy systems that were more efficient than anything previously imagined. In Japan, giants had taken leadership roles in earthquake preparation, using their knowledge of geology to help make cities safer. In Kenya, they were teaching new farming methods that were producing 3 times more food using less water and no harmful chemicals. Every continent now had communities where giants and humans lived and worked together, but the pattern was always the same. The giants naturally became the leaders and decision-makers, while humans took on supporting roles that used their unique skills and abilities. Lisa had traveled to several of these new communities over the past few months, and what she saw amazed her every time. In California, she visited a place where giants and humans were working together to clean up ocean pollution. The giants had designed filters and cleaning systems, while humans operated the boats and smaller equipment needed for the detailed work. In Germany, she saw giants working with human engineers to redesign city transportation systems. The giants thought in terms of moving large numbers of people efficiently, while the humans focused on the comfort and convenience details that made the systems work for everyday use. What struck Lisa most during these visits was how happy the humans seemed. She had expected to find people who felt pushed aside or resentful about no longer being in charge. Instead, she found communities where humans seemed more satisfied with their work and daily lives than in most traditional human cities. It's like having really wise older relatives move in and help solve all the family problems, explained Dr. Chen, a human researcher working with giants in Singapore. Sure, they make the big decisions, but they make better decisions than we were making on our own. This wasn't true everywhere, of course. There were groups of humans who opposed what they called the giant takeover. Some governments had initially tried to resist or control the awakening giants in their territories, but these efforts had failed. not because the giants fought back, but because they simply ignored human attempts to limit them while continuing to help solve major problems. When the Australian government tried to restrict giant activities to certain areas, the giants politely declined to follow these restrictions and continued their work on climate restoration projects. Within weeks, the positive results of their work made the government's opposition look foolish, and public opinion forced the politicians to back down. The European Union had spent months debating how to regulate giant communities, but their discussions became meaningless when those communities started producing solutions to problems the EU had been struggling with for decades. The giants weren't asking for permission to help. They were just helping, and the results spoke for themselves. Lisa noticed that human society was reorganizing itself around the giants in ways both large and small. Architecture was changing, with new buildings designed to accommodate both human and giant needs. Transportation systems were being redesigned. Even everyday items like furniture and tools were being redesigned to work better in mixed communities. But the most interesting changes were psychological. Lisa observed that humans in giant-led communities seemed less stressed and anxious than people in traditional human cities. Crime rates had dropped dramatically. Arguments and conflicts were much less common. People seemed more focused on their work and more satisfied with their daily lives. "Why do you think that is?" Lisa asked Zara during one of their regular evening conversations. Zara considered the question carefully. When there is clear, fair leadership that people trust, they can focus their energy on productive activities instead of fighting over power and resources, she explained. Your species wastes enormous amounts of energy on conflicts that serve no useful purpose. Lisa had to admit this was true. In traditional human societies, huge amounts of time and energy went into political arguments, power struggles, and competition for status. In the giant-led communities, these conflicts barely existed. When Zara made a decision, people accepted it and moved on with their work. But this raised questions that worried some humans. Dr. Williams, a political scientist who had come to study the new communities, expressed concerns that many people shared. "What happens to human independence and self-determination?" he asked during a community meeting. "Are we becoming dependent on the giants for everything?" Zara addressed this question directly. "We do not want you to be dependent," she said. "We want you to be effective. A good teacher does not do their students' work for them. They help students learn to do better work themselves." To demonstrate this point, the giants had been gradually shifting more responsibilities to humans as they proved they could handle them effectively. Human communities that showed they could manage resources wisely and resolve conflicts peacefully were given more autonomy. Those that continued to struggle with basic cooperation received more direct, giant supervision. Lisa saw this happening in her own role. 6 months ago, Zara had made most of the decisions about how to interact with human governments and media. Now, Lisa was handling many of these interactions herself, with Zara providing guidance only when needed. The same pattern was happening in giant communities worldwide. Humans who demonstrated wisdom, competence, and genuine concern for their community's well-being were being given increasing leadership responsibilities under giant oversight. It was creating a new kind of society where leadership was based on proven ability rather than politics or popularity. People who were good at solving problems rose to positions where they could solve bigger problems. People who were good at teaching helped educate others. People who were good at organizing helped coordinate community activities. Lisa realized that what they were witnessing wasn't the replacement of human leadership with giant leadership. It was the development of a system where leadership roles went to whoever could do them best, whether human or giant. The results were impressive. Global hunger was decreasing rapidly as giant-designed farming methods spread. Climate change was being addressed with technologies that actually worked instead of just sounding good in political speeches. Diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries were being cured with giant knowledge of biology and medicine. But perhaps most importantly, human communities were becoming more peaceful and cooperative. When people could see that their leaders genuinely cared about solving problems rather than gaining power, they were more willing to work together toward common goals. As Lisa sat in her office late one evening, reviewing reports from giant communities around the world, she realized that the question wasn't whether humanity should accept giant leadership. The question was whether they would learn from it well enough to eventually lead themselves with the same wisdom and effectiveness. The giants had made it clear that their goal wasn't permanent control over human society. Their goal was teaching humanity how to build the kind of civilization that could last for thousands of years without destroying itself or its planet. And judging by what Lisa had seen over the past 6 months, that lesson was working. 1 year after that life-changing day in the Amazon chamber, Lisa stood on the observation deck of the Global Coordination Center in what used to be called New York City. The city skyline had changed dramatically, with new buildings designed to accommodate both humans and giants working together. But the changes went far deeper than just architecture. Looking out over the bustling streets below, Lisa could see the new world that had emerged. Giants walked alongside humans on specially designed sidewalks. Human children played in parks where giant adults supervised from benches built to their scale. Transportation systems moved smoothly with vehicles designed for mixed communities. But what amazed Lisa most was how natural it all looked now. A year ago, the sight of a 12-foot-tall person would have stopped traffic. Now, people barely glanced up when Atlas or Nova walked by. The giants had become part of daily life. Lisa's own life had transformed beyond recognition. She was no longer just an archaeologist who had stumbled onto the discovery of a lifetime. She had become something like an ambassador between two species, helping to document and facilitate the greatest change in human civilization since people first started building cities. Her current project was writing the official history of what everyone now called the Great Awakening. But more than just recording events, she was trying to understand what this change meant for the future of humanity. The numbers told an incredible story. Global hunger had been reduced by 70% in just 1 year. Climate change was being reversed faster than anyone had thought possible. Diseases that had killed millions were becoming rare. Wars and major conflicts had virtually disappeared, not because of force or threats, but because the giants had shown humans better ways to solve disputes. The most interesting thing, Lisa said during her weekly interview with Dr. Peterson, who was still studying the social changes, is that humans haven't become passive or dependent. They've become more capable. This was true. In giant-led communities, humans were learning skills and solving problems at levels they had never achieved before. When you had teachers who could think in terms of centuries rather than years, who understood complex systems better than any human expert, the learning process accelerated dramatically. Take David, a former construction worker Lisa had interviewed in the Seattle community. Before the giants arrived, he had been struggling to find steady work as automation replaced human labor in many industries. Now, he was leading a team of 50 humans in building new water purification systems under giant supervision. "I never thought I was smart enough to understand this kind of engineering," David told her. "But when Nova explains things, it all makes sense. She doesn't just tell you what to do, she helps you understand why it works that way." Or consider Rebecca, who had been a struggling single mother in Detroit before the giants established a community there. Now she was managing food distribution for 3,000 people, using organizational methods the giants had taught her. "The giants don't do the work for us," Rebecca explained. "They show us how to do it better than we ever thought we could. It's like having the best teacher in the world for every subject you need to learn." This pattern was being repeated everywhere. Humans were taking on bigger responsibilities and handling them more effectively than ever before, but always with giant guidance and support available when needed. The political changes had been just as dramatic. Traditional governments still existed, but their role had fundamentally changed. Instead of competing for power and arguing about policies, political leaders now focused on implementing solutions that the giants had proven to work. When President Johnson asked Lisa to explain why his approval ratings were at historic highs, despite having less actual power than previous presidents, she had to think carefully about her answer. "People judge leaders based on results," she finally said. "When the results are better than they've ever been, people are satisfied with their leadership, even if that leadership is following guidance from others." The giants had also begun revealing more of their advanced knowledge as human communities, proved they could handle it responsibly. Medical techniques that seemed like magic were being taught to human doctors. Engineering principles that could revolutionize technology were being shared with human scientists. Agricultural methods that could feed the entire world sustainably were being implemented globally. But the giants were still selective about what they shared, and with whom. Communities that showed wisdom and cooperation received more advanced knowledge. Those that still struggled with basic cooperation received only the fundamentals. "Why are you so careful about what you teach us?" Lisa asked Zara during one of their regular evening walks through the New York Community Center. Zara looked down at her with that gentle expression that had become so familiar over the past year. "Imagine giving a sharp knife to a child," she said. "The knife itself is not dangerous, but in the wrong hands, at the wrong time, it can cause great harm. Knowledge is the same way." Lisa understood. Humanity had a history of using new discoveries for both helpful and harmful purposes. The giants were making sure that as human capabilities increased, human wisdom increased along with them. But perhaps the most important change was in how humans saw themselves and their future. For the first time in generations, people were genuinely optimistic about what lay ahead. Crime rates had dropped to historic lows. Mental health problems were becoming rare. People reported higher levels of satisfaction with their lives and work. "It's like we finally stopped fighting against each other and started working together toward the same goals," explained Dr. Martinez, who now ran educational programs in the Mexico City community. "When you have clear leadership that everyone trusts, and when you can see that cooperation actually works, it becomes natural to be cooperative." Lisa had seen this transformation in her own family. Her brother Tom had been deeply skeptical about the giants. At first worried that humanity was giving up its independence. But after his community's giant-led council solved the unemployment and housing problems that had plagued his city for decades, his attitude had completely changed. "I still don't like the idea of being led by another species," Tom had told her recently. "But I can't argue with the results. My kids are getting a better education than I ever dreamed possible. My neighborhood is safe and clean. I have meaningful work that pays well. If this is what giving up independence looks like, maybe independence was overrated." The giants had also made it clear that their current level of involvement in human affairs wasn't meant to be permanent. Communities that consistently demonstrated wisdom and effective cooperation were gradually being given more autonomy. The goal, Zara had explained, was to teach humans how to maintain this level of civilization on their own. "We are not conquerors or permanent rulers," Zara told the United Nations Assembly during her first official address to that body. "We are teachers and guides, helping our younger cousins learn to build a civilization that can last for thousands of years. When you have learned these lessons well enough, you will lead yourselves with the same wisdom we are trying to share with you." As Lisa finished writing the final chapter of her book that evening, she reflected on the question that had started this whole journey. Guess who's in charge now? The answer was more complex than anyone had expected. Yes, the giants were in charge in the sense that they made the major decisions and provided overall guidance. But humans were also more in charge of their own lives than they had ever been before. They had meaningful work, stable communities, and a real voice in how those communities were run. Most importantly, they were learning to be in charge of themselves, in ways that actually worked for everyone involved. Looking out her window at the peaceful, prosperous community below, where humans and giants worked together as naturally as if they had always been neighbors, Lisa realized that the real answer to that question wasn't about who was in charge. It was about how much better things could be when the people in charge actually knew what they were doing and genuinely cared about everyone's well-being. And after a year of watching this new world take shape, Lisa was convinced that humanity was finally learning those lessons too.